Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really powerful idea. What if all the chaos we're seeing in the world right now, the massive debt, the global tensions, what if it isn't new at all? What if it's all part of a predictable cycle that's been repeating for centuries?
I mean, you look around, right? Debts are just piling up. You see these deep internal conflicts that are dividing societies, and tensions between the major world powers are getting hotter. It totally feels like we're living in unprecedented times.
But what if it's all happened before? What if these events are just pieces of a much larger, repeating pattern that has guided the fate of nations for centuries? Imagine if you could see the actual blueprint for how empires rise and how they fall. Okay, let's dive in.
Well, this pattern has a name. It's called the Big Cycle. It's basically a model that maps out the rise and decline of the world's most powerful empires by looking at the logical cause and effect relationships that drive history forward.
And this isn't just some abstract theory, It's based on a deep dive into the last 500 years of history, tracking the world's 10 most powerful empires over that whole time to find the common threads that connect all of their stories.
What's so fascinating is how these cycles overlap. You can almost picture them as these giant overlapping waves. And those moments where the waves cross, where a new rising power challenges the old established one, well, historically, those are some of the most dangerous periods. It's a real high-stakes fight for the top spot.
The key thing to get here is that this cycle isn't random. Not at all. It's driven by these logical, almost mechanical cause and effect relationships that consistently push empires through three very distinct phases: the rise, the top, and then the decline.
So phase one is the rise. This is the building phase, when a nation is laying its foundations. We're talking about strong investment in education, a culture of hard work and civility. That kind of stuff sparks innovation. And this isn't just about feeling good. It translates directly into economic muscle, making the country way more productive and competitive on the world stage.
Next up is the top. But here's the paradox. The very fruits of success start to contain the seeds of decline. All that prosperity, well, it leads to higher wages, which actually makes the country less competitive. It also leads to people borrowing way too much, a bit of complacency, and those gaps between the rich and the poor start to get wider and wider.
And finally, of course, you have the decline. This phase is usually kicked off by some kind of financial weakness, maybe a huge bubble bursts. And that problem gets amplified by intense internal fighting over wealth and values. Plus, you have a rising power on the outside challenging you. This is where the old order really starts to crumble.
And here we see this classic financial trap that just pours gasoline on the fire. When debts get totally unmanageable, the temptation is to just print more money. It feels like an easy way out, right? But it's so dangerous. It's a move that ultimately devalues the currency and can just vaporize a nation's wealth.
Okay, so that's the cycle. But how do we actually measure an empire's strength? How do we know where a country is in this cycle? Well, it turns out it's not just about military might. There are some very specific vital signs you have to watch.
The model tracks these 8 key metrics, and you can really think of them like a comprehensive health check for an empire. Early on, during the rise, you'll see strengths in things like education and innovation. But later, during the decline, you'll see weaknesses pop up in its financial power and the status of its currency.
And that last one, having the world's main reserve currency, that is a true economic superpower. It's a huge deal. It means the rest of the world relies on your money, which allows you to borrow way more cheaply than anyone else and basically finance your entire global influence.
So by tracking these 8 metrics over time, we can do more than just see where a country is in the cycle. We can also start to get some real insights into what might be coming down the road. It's all about learning how to read the signs.
Because, just like in a health checkup, some signs of trouble appear long before the situation gets critical. This model suggests that the exact same thing is true for empires. The key is just knowing what to look for.
And this chart illustrates that progression brilliantly. You start with these early warning signs, things like rising debt and a widening wealth gap, and if those are left unchecked, they can eventually snowball into these late-stage crises, like widespread civil conflict, losing that all-important reserve currency status, and even total collapse.
This brings us to a really critical point. Decline isn't necessarily destiny. According to this framework, the greatest challenge a nation faces is almost always internal. It's about whether it can make the incredibly hard choices needed to get its own house in order and sustain its success.
And that really leaves us with a final thought. This framework isn't a crystal ball. It doesn't predict the future.
But by showing us this map of history, it empowers us to look at the world today and ask much smarter questions about where we are in the cycle and what might be just around the corner.